This video is intended to mostly be just documentary about what led to the stage of me acquiring this right here. To do that, I'm gonna take you back to some things from my childhood, kind of growing up. I'll try to not be too long-winded. A lot of this is probably more important to me than it is for you, but this is a documentation for my posterity more than it is for complete strangers. So if you are interested just in the story of this Jeep specifically, skip forward to this point right here. Otherwise, you're going to get some background, so a little bit of history. So Jeeps and the idea of Jeeps have been a part of my life growing up. When I was little, we had a 1956 Jeep that my father described as a Korean War Jeep. It was not a military Jeep. As I recall, it was a civilian issue. So I'm guessing, without looking up any info, that it was probably like a CJ5 or something around there. And I vaguely remember that vehicle running and taking a couple trips in it, and it being like something really, really cool. But most of the time it was broken, and for many years it just sat outside the front of our house. And I remember as a kid playing in it, pretending to drive it and stuff. And so I have a lot of memories in that vehicle, even though it never really ran, outside of a few specific sledding moments that I can recall. So this idea of Jeeps is something that I kind of grew up with. When I was in high school, my grandma wrecked her car, and my choir teacher, who was kind of a car guy, said to me, hey, you should take her engine, which was a 454 big block, and put it in that Jeep and do like this really cool mod. And I was enamored with that idea. And so at that point, the Jeep had been sent to somebody where it had been for several years. So I called that person up and said, hey, I'm interested in that Jeep, and I'm thinking I'm going to come get it. And he said, oh, you just missed it. We just recently sent it to the scrapyard. Just been sitting around too long. Nobody's doing anything with it. And I was really disappointed about that, and that took me a long time to get over. But about 10 years after that, I came into a little bit of money, and that idea of wanting a Jeep was still there. And so I got on eBay, and I found one that already had been modified to a V8 and had a lot of mods on it that I thought were pretty cool at the time. It was a 1948 CJ2A. It had been a project vehicle for a father-son team, and once they got what they thought was finished, they went to start it, and it threw a rod, and they decided that they were kind of done with it and ready to move on, and so they put it up for sale as is. So I drove down to California. I bid on it thinking that I wouldn't get it, and nobody else bid on it, and so I ended up getting it. I had the money, so I drove down to California, trailered it back home to Idaho, and some things on this Jeep that are notable, I thought were cool at the time. It had 33-inch mud tires. Obviously, to fit those, it had to have a suspension lift, and then it had the Ford V8 engine that I mentioned, but it had thrown a rod, but all the brackets and everything were already there. So I got a new block and rebuilt a new Ford engine and put it in. And then I got working on the body. And there were a couple of rust spots that I knew were a problem, so I started cutting those out. And the further into it I got, the more I realized just how extensive the problem was. Some of the pieces on that Jeep were rusted so bad that I literally pulled them off the vehicle without undoing any fasteners. The floor had, the driver's side in particular, had one of the orange construction street signs they had gotten from somewhere. They had just put that in the floor, and when I found that, I removed it. I realized that both passenger seats were Swiss cheese with rust. You could practically run this Jeep, Flintstone style. And so ultimately I was led to determine that it was in my best interest to just replace the entire tub body. For that, I needed about $2,000. So for the last decade or so, I've been saving up towards that end. I'm trying to get up to about $2,500 because I need some money for paint as well. It seems like I get to about $1,500 and then life happens and I have to dive into that money a little bit and help cover some bills for a month or two. And that account ends up dropping back down to $1,000 or $800. And then I work it back up to $1,500 and then it happens all again. And so I'm kind of in this cycle and I can't get over this hump of about $1,500. So this vehicle, this old Jeep, has been sitting in a barn up at my mom's house, to her dismay, not going anywhere fast. And really cool ideas with it and for it that some people can see and others really can't, but just not going anywhere fast. Well, about a little over a month ago, I was watching YouTube and a video came up recommended that caught my eye from Matt's Off-Road Recovery. I watched it. I started watching some of his other videos. I soon subscribed to his channel. Even though it's the same thing over and over, each one is thoroughly entertaining. And to do a lot of his recoveries, he has a Jeep Cherokee that I assumed at first was heavily modified. Because he does some pretty incredible stuff with that little Jeep. But in one of the videos, he does a walk around of his Jeep. And yes, the suspension and chassis he's modified to fit his needs. But the engine, transfer case, transmission, he says are all pretty much stock with just a few minor upgrades to the coolant system, which is common, and I'll address that more in a few minutes, referring how that plays into this guy. So that piqued my interest. Not only did I have this old nostalgic tie-in with Jeeps, but when I was growing up, the Jeep Cherokee was kind of the Jeep to have. It was all the rage. My junior high and high school years. And so there was another, even though I never owned this particular model, there was another kind of chord of nostalgia that was struck from watching this. So on a whim, I got on my local classifieds, and something also interesting happened here. The classifieds have kind of like two pages. One page has all just the generic stuff in different categories, for sale by owner stuff. And then they've got a separate kind of page just for automotive, car selling stuff. Well, I got on the first page and typed in Jeep Cherokee, and a lot of times that will redirect you to the second page, but in this case it didn't. And I came across a lot of Cherokees that were being parted out, but there was half a dozen or so that were being sold as project vehicles. And most of them were in the $1,500 range, except this guy. This one was listed at $750, and the seller, I felt, was forthright in both his ads and in my later communications with him. He stated that it needed a new battery and that it was overheating and needed the coolant system addressed. But other than that, everything seemed to be working. Well, because I already had this other project Jeep, I couldn't really justify another one. So for about a week, I legitimately tried to talk myself out of it. And it just kind of sat on the back burner of my mind. One day I woke up and it just kind of hit me that in all the videos that were now coming up recommended, that were a lot of them Jeep related, A lot of the mods I was seeing that were really common with this vehicle were suspension, tires, and axles differentials. And so I thought, I've got access to some 33-inch mud tires that aren't doing anything. And there's a good possibility on my 48 Jeep that has some locking differentials. So maybe I could even swap the axles over. So two of the essential components that people are putting a lot of money into to get these to the off-road stage that people like, I already potentially had. And so that suddenly made this much more practical of an idea. However, if I was going to salvage parts off of the 48, it didn't make sense to really keep it anymore after that. Now, something I've been struggling with for a couple of years with the 48 is that I'm kind of a purist. So I was growing increasingly unhappy, not only with it just sitting around, not doing anything for me, but the fact that it was so modified that it wouldn't really fit into the true classical nature of it. But it was so old that it was probably not going to be great for doing anything modern with it either. And so I've been trying to take it back to, as much as I can, to its original state, with the exception of I wasn't going to change the engine back, or the transmission that was also upgraded. And so it was only going to get to a certain point, and that was something that was probably going to always kind of bug me. So that wouldn't be the case with this. So I'm thinking it's not practical if I take the tires and the axles and everything off of that. It's not practical to keep doing that one. So could I bring myself to scrap it at that point? One of the reasons I haven't scrapped it is because of how much money I put into it initially. I've got a little too much pride to take that much of a financial bath on it. But the tires alone are worth more than half of what I paid for that vehicle. So if I can salvage those, that softens the blow immensely. And so that suddenly made this vehicle much more practical. So I contacted the guy. He said it was still available, but that he also thought it had possibly blown a head gasket. So I reach out to my buddy Joe, who's a mechanic, and has bought and sold tons of cars in his lifetime, so he knows kind of the pitfalls to look for. So it's like, hey, could I get you to come with me? It wasn't too far from where he lived, so it was a pretty easy request. So we went over, and I had in my head, with coolant system, new battery, and head gasket, I had in my head $400. It was listed at $750, as I mentioned before. We got there, we scrutinized it, looked it over, started it up. We didn't really see any signs of a blown head gasket. The guy who was selling it works for a towing salvage company, and they had impounded this vehicle, and the owners didn't want to pay the fee to get it out, and so they released the rights to it. And he told us that it was either sell it or send it to the scrapyard, but he thought it was kind of a cool vehicle and that somebody might be able to do something with it, so he put it up on the classifieds. So my friend and I, we give it a pretty good look over. Power steering pump is leaking profusely. As I drove it, it was whining, but was still functioning. So that needed to be addressed pretty quick. But otherwise, we didn't see any signs of a blown head gasket. So we're driving it around, and as we're driving it around, the yard has this little L-shaped loop that's mostly gravel, has a couple places with some washboards and some bumps. So it gave us a good idea kind of what condition the suspension was in. We tried out the four-wheel drive. Everything seemed to function as you would expect on a vehicle of this age. The guy that we dealt with was really cool and was very accommodating. He did say, it's not registered, so technically you shouldn't leave the yard. But if you want to see what it's like on the street, I'll just happen to be looking this way when you drive out the gate, so I didn't see anything. So we're keeping an eye on the temperature. It is climbing. It hits 210, which is the regular temp for this vehicle. It starts inching past that, so yeah, it is overheating. So we get to a point after driving it around the loop 3 or 4 times. I want to see what it's like on the street. So, he looks the other way. We go hit the street. I only went about a quarter mile down the street. Just got it up to 35, 40 just to see what it was like, because we couldn't do that speed in the yard. It was getting close to the red, so I flipped it around and came back. Also observed at that point that the brakes left a lot to be desired. Next to the coolant system, the brakes are going to need to be addressed pretty quick. Fortunately, it's work I can do myself that I'm familiar with. It's not overly expensive. So anyway, after test driving it, I came there thinking that 400 was my top. Test drove it, gave me some faith in it. In my mind, I went up to 500. So I get out, I'm talking to the seller, and I told him I need to go do a little research on what it's going to take for, the coolant system and things like that to see if I can actually afford it. And he says, okay, yeah, I can respect that. That's fine. Just out of curiosity, would you go $550 on it? So it drops his price $200. I looked at him and I said, we're really close to what the number I have in my head, but I do need to see kind of what I would be into it after that to see if I can actually afford it. So if you'll give me a day or two and I'll get back to you. And he said, yeah, I'm not getting a lot of interest on it. So it's not going to go anywhere. So yeah, by all means do that. So I went and took a day and a half, looked up parts, watched videos to get a good idea what labor and price I would be into getting it to a drivable state. One of the attractions to this vehicle is that I felt that for around $1,000 total, I could get it drivable. And then after that, I could, every time I get up to a couple $100, I could do the next upgrade. But in the meantime, it's still drivable and usable, which my old Jeep is not. So that's a huge bonus for this one. So I do my research, determine that that's kind of the case. I got back to him and I said, hey, every little bit helps. We're close. In my mind, I was at 500 when you said 550. Let's meet at the middle of 525. He responded back quickly, said, it's a deal. Let's do it. He was also very accommodating. I told him my same friend that came with me had a trailer that we could get it from his place 40 miles away up to where I live, but the trailer needed a day or two of work to get roadworthy, which so I asked him if we could leave it there for a couple of days to do that, but I would come pay for it in the meantime. And he said, yeah, that's totally fine as long as the yard doesn't fill up and we need the space. Nobody will really be bothered with it being here. So we came to our agreements on Thursday. I went and paid for it on Friday, and I told him our goal is Monday. Well, we didn't quite make Monday, but I reached out to him. I said, due to my own schedule, it looks like Thursday is going to be the next day. We can make it. And he said, that's fine. So we worked hard on that trailer. We did not make it Thursday before closing time, but I did keep him updated throughout the day. Ultimately, he pulled it out of the yard and left the keys in it. He said he'd put them under the mat, but there were no mats when I got there. The key was just in the ignition. But it also, the battery was practically dead to the world, so it's not like somebody could take it anyway. They would have to tow it to steal it. Anyway, not a big deal. So that's when a little bit after midnight, so technically Friday morning, when we picked it up, and I documented that on another video, so you can watch that one, which is quite a bit shorter, that initial pickup. The rest of the videos related to this Jeep will be more action oriented, and I've already started picking up some parts for it, and so I'm going to start working on that right away. So that is how I acquired the Jeep. A name has been suggested. I'm not going to disclose it just yet, but I spent the weekend with my brother and his family doing some recreation, and I told them about the project. They are all really excited for me and are encouraging me to get this up and running. And we had some good talks, and there's some excitement around this. So let's start getting some work done on it.